So I am David Campbell, and I am presenting this paper with my friend Ali Carkoglu from Koç University. I'm from Binghamton University, but we have a third author on the paper, Erdem Aytaç, who's also from Koç University. And while you see here the name of our paper is Determinants of Giving Behavior in Turkey, Ali and I just changed it, and I forgot to change the slide. So I will tell you that our paper is still about giving behavior in Turkey, but we didn't look only at individual. We wanted to specify what we meant by giving behavior. In this case, we're talking about individual donations, direct assistance, and volunteering. And I would just say, by means of introduction, as I mentioned in a question I asked earlier, I'm relatively new to Turkish philanthropy, but I have taught at Koç University 2 of the past 3 summers, a course in experiential philanthropy, and I've gotten to know a bit about Turkey in part through the help of my friend Ali. And so I'm really delighted that I can share with you what we've learned through this project. I will talk about some of the framing issues, sort of the literature or research questions. Ali will talk about the study and the findings of the study, and then I'll share some discussion, sort of observations. So there has been a lot of study about giving behavior. A proliferation of studies, but most of the work on giving behavior has really looked at what giving behavior is like in developed civil society contexts. At the same time, those questions about what motivates giving behavior has been distinct from other studies that people have done about the nature and extent of philanthropy in particular settings, some of those in developed settings, some of those in developing countries. Our interest is in trying to advance understanding of both of these. What are the determinants of giving in Turkey, but also what's the nature and extent of giving in Turkey. And in this paper, we'll focus particularly on those questions of motivations and what we know about giving behavior in Turkey. So here are 3 research questions. We want to focus on first what demographic factors affect philanthropic giving in Turkey. So what do we know about who gives and what is the relationship between demographics and giving behavior? Then second, how does giving behavior vary based on form? Are the people who, do the same people make direct donations, who maybe give direct assistance to individuals, families, friends, neighbors in need, are the same people who volunteer? Are there variations in giving behavior across these 3 categories of giving, or 3 ways of trying to make a difference? And then how do philanthropic giving motivations in Turkey compare with findings from other research about giving elsewhere? There's been, as I noted, a lot of research on determinants of giving. And if you look at any of the work by Beckers and Wiepking, they did an effective job of synthesizing over 600 studies of giving behavior. And in their work, they identify that giving behavior can be broken into 2 categories: demographic characteristics that are associated with giving, and core beliefs and attitudes toward giving. So demographics, what type of people give, and then core beliefs and attitudes. Are there core beliefs and attitudes that influence people's decisions to give? So if you look at these, the demographic characteristics, the characteristics that consistently come up as influencing giving are religiosity, which is obviously an area that we're interested for this symposium. Age, that the older you are, up to age 65, the more likely you are to give. Education, the more education you have, the more likely you are to give. The higher your income, the higher your income, the more likely you are to give. Gender, amount of giving, men, higher amounts of giving are associated with men. Likelihood of giving is more associated with women. There's a surprise, right? And then in terms of other characteristics that associate with other demographic characteristics that are associated with giving, owning a home, marital status. If if you own a home, you're more likely to give. If you're married, you're more likely to give. If you have children, you're more likely to give. If you come from a family in which your parents had a high level of education and a high income, you're more likely to give. And if you have a history of volunteering, you're more likely to give. So this is really useful knowledge that we have about giving in general. The question, and then there are some values that researchers have identified also mediate those demographics, which may enhance or may show that may influence those demographics in some way. Solicitation. If you're asked to give, solicitation is going to increase the likelihood of giving. If others know that you're going to make a donation, so if people know, if others know, you know you're going to get some recognition for the donation, that will affect the likelihood that you will give. If you're aware of community needs, and then if you're confident in individual charitable organizations. So the benefit of these 3 slides about demographics and values and those variables that mediate is they tell us a lot about what characteristics are associated with giving. So when Ali and I were looking at trying to understand the Turkish situation, there we found some limitations that sort of affect our knowledge. Most of the studies about giving behavior are set in the US or the UK or the Netherlands or in settings with well-developed civil society sectors. And then there is some divergence around some of the demographics that raise questions for us. That in research from Korea and Taiwan, more education is not associated with giving. In the same way, in other Asian settings, in Korea and Singapore, age is not associated with giving. So we would wonder, why is there this divergence? And so, the way that shapes our research is to say, does research about giving behavior stand up across cultures? Are there differences, for example, in the Turkish context? So, question for us. And so I think this is really an important sort of framing issue for the work that we're doing. To what extent does the previous research that's been done hold up when looked at when compared with Turkey, which is a different context in the US, UK, Netherlands, and some other well-developed settings. One other way to sort of think about giving behavior is sort of the enabling situation. How likely is it or how much facilitation is there for giving? The Hudson Institute has created an index of philanthropic freedom that looks at the conditions for giving in countries around the world, this index of philanthropic freedom. And there are sort of 3 variables that affect giving. One is how easy is it to create organizations? And in Turkey, there is a bureaucratic, somewhat difficult process to create civil society organizations. What's the tax treatment of giving? As in the US, we have tax deductibility. Are there things that make it, does the government make it easier for people to make donations? Do they encourage giving? What's the tax treatment? And then transnational giving, is it, how difficult or easy is it for people in one country to give in another country? And in the Turkish context, Turkey came in really just right in the middle of this index of philanthropic freedom. So there are some obstacles to organization creation, ways in which giving is not facilitated, and transnational giving, there are some obstacles as well. I'm going to stop there, let Ali talk about the study, and then I'll come back and talk about the discussion.
Thank you.
All right,
Thank you, David. It's a pleasure to be here. This study is a continuation of something that we have done more than a decade ago in 2004 with the help of Ford Foundation. And there have been quite a number of reactions to that study. at the time, but more recently, in 2014, Charities Aid Foundation had published donation, volunteerism, and what else? Helping unknown individuals in comparative perspective for Turkey. And the Turkish authorities, I would say, the foundation administration had been very reactive because Turkey ranked at the very bottom of the comparative research. And we were invited to express our perspective on the basis of 2004 study. And I basically at that meeting had to say that, we tend to see very similar patterns to Charities Aid Foundation findings in our 2004 studies, that Turkey is not particularly a very philanthropic society, giving religiously motivated or not is not very prevalent. However, we were not able to put this into a comparative context, and that gave us an opportunity to actually go forward once again to the Third Sector Foundation to repeat the study of 2004, which they came forward and supported. Here are the 2004 study, and I will present the results in 2004 in comparison to 2015. But in 2015, we had about 2,500 face-to-face survey interviews across 68 Turkish provinces. Random sample, I could go into the details of sampling if there are any questions later on. So we basically did technically, up?
You have to hit manually.
Oh, all right, okay. Okay, this. So this is the CAF, or Charities Aid Foundation, results from 2010 through 2014. And the very last one for 2015 comes from our own survey, because Charities Aid Foundation did not include Turkey in their 2015 study. I'm afraid not primarily, somewhat due to the reactions they got in 2014. But we asked exactly the same question in the same wording, and these are the results that we get. And the results indicate that, giving money over the past 1 month, and that's the reference point that CAF uses, and that actually is problematic in a predominantly Muslim setting, depending on the lunar calendar. When Ramadan hits near or not so near to the fieldwork time, people would not report having made donations, obviously. And I think this is a valid methodological criticism from a Muslim setting towards Charities Aid Foundation research questions and the wording. Past 1 month assumes that there is an institutionalized giving behavior, very much along the lines of Western country experiences, where people put it on their cards and then make the payments in a very regular way. Whereas in a Muslim setting, first, these institutions are not there yet in a prevalent way. Second, people tend to give in accordance to the timing of Ramadan. But nevertheless, the figures that we find are not very different from the overall trends of Charities Aid Foundation, although the differences are significant statistically speaking. We're not finding 60% reporting to us that they gave money, or giving their time and volunteering for organizations. And that's also another limitation of CAF. Giving your time foreign organization taking care of your neighbor's kids is not included in that question. Are you with me? That doesn't include many of the activities in a setting such as Turkey. And helping a stranger, perhaps more generalizable question, remains very low, because this is very reflective of the social trust, social capital in Turkey. So here are the findings for the two surveys. 2004 is in lighter bars. In all except volunteering, we see a decline in making donations or helping needy people, and they are all in the significant range. I mean, statistically speaking, these are significant drops. This is not just due to a statistical artifact that we observe. So that brings me to the conclusion, I mean, to an important question. Why? I mean, in 2004, I mean, between 2004 and 15, Turkish per capita income has more than doubled. Turkish economy has done quite well. Politically speaking, it's a very stable period under Justice and Development Party. That political stability basically should lead to a more willingness to make donations, because less uncertainty, less worry for the future should push people towards making more donations, but it doesn't appear so. There are a couple of reasons that comes to our mind. One is the fact that 2004 was an exceptionally good year. 2004 had the highest level of consumers' confidence, very low inflation, high growth rates, about 6-7% growth rate. So the self-confidence of individuals in their economic abilities was at the peak, and we have the details in the paper. When you come to 2015, that confidence is nowhere to be found. And that primarily means that people basically felt very insecure in 2015, and our fieldwork came just before the November elections. If you remember, about a year and a half ago, right after the June elections, we had many terror attacks from ISIL as well as the PKK, and the uncertainty as to the future for the country was quite high. That should have an impact on the reductions. The only explanation I have for this slight rise, and this is an insignificant rise statistically speaking, could be attributed to the Gezi events and habituation of people taking their initiative in neighborhood meetings and volunteering their time for changing urban politics and social life. Okay, so we look into the details, and these details could be somewhat burdensome in the remaining like 3-4 minutes that I have. So I'm not going to go into the details other than just emphasizing some of the main results. We see, for instance, that women's likelihood to make formal donations is lower than men. That's not a surprise. This is repeated in other findings in comparative format with 2004 and 2015. These are the CAF questions that we asked in 2015. And what's also important is that, you know, more money in the pockets of the people means more likelihood to donate. Kurds are not particularly different than Turks in making formal donations as well as volunteering, but in helping others, they are more likely to help unknown individuals in the parochial setting of Eastern and Southeastern Anatolia, which is not a surprise to me. Social capital, if you notice, is insignificant. This is one of the dark side of Turkish social science, not social science, but Turkish society at large. We diagnose that Turkey has one of the lowest levels of social capital. Lower than Turkey, I think, are Brazil and Russia, for instance. Those are the two other exceptions. These results basically are replicated in, predominantly replicated. There are slight changes in our comparative 2004-2015 questions. The main difference between the CAF questions and our questions is that in our question we ask the reference time period to be 1 full year, so as to cover the whole lunar as well as what is the other calendar? Solar calendar. And we do observe that when you take into account the full year, the amount and prevalence of donations and helping other actually increases. Why don't I leave the floor to you to talk about the overall findings? Otherwise, we'll get stuck into
We'll go to
the
last
graphs.
slide, then I'll leave. Right now we'll go on. All right. So where does this, what does this add up to, based on sort of how we framed it? In the Turkish context, education is the variable that most aligns with previous research. Where it diverges is on gender, that women are less likely to give direct donations, in-kind donations, or to volunteer, and it diverges on age, at least with the Charities Aid, the CAF data. One thing we didn't talk about, but that we think is important, is that civic activism mediates income as a determinant, so that people who are more civically active are more likely to give, and civic activism sort of mediates income determines that people give, but people who are civically active are more likely to give, so civic activism mediates income. And then one thing that we hinted at but didn't talk about in depth that I think Ali and Erdem and I want to spend more time on in future papers is the differences between formal and informal giving. You saw in all of our results that we distinguish between direct donations and sort of helping others. There's a lot of helping others that you don't see in a lot of philanthropic studies, particularly in developed and Western contexts. We think in understanding philanthropy in Turkey and in other contexts that we really need to look more at this question of informal giving, and it's not studied enough, and it's a really important part of understanding philanthropy in Turkey. That was maybe a minute and a half, but I think that enough.